So we had breakfast together.
Yep.
And we had supper together.
Every day.
Every
Oh,
day. The only Thursdays, Dad went to Lions.
That's right, Dad was at Lions
And that
on
would be
Thursday.
the only time that we didn't have breakfast and dinner together as a family. And I don't know that I ever remember our parents telling us that what happens at this table stays at this table, but we knew that. And Dad raised us to keep us in the loop. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
they
absolutely.
talked about what was going on in town and what was happening, and so we knew, but we also knew that we were very privileged
Sure.
to be able to know that. And so, and we were involved. I mean, I was in 2 or 3 pictures in the paper when I was a kid when they were doing something and on a float once. And
Well, yeah, Dad would, when we were children growing up, Dad would not only, we were always aware of what happened at the chamber, but if there was certain circumstances, as Peg mentioned, where he needed somebody in a photo for something they were doing, then all right, Mom, bring them down. And
Okay, you were sort of props.
that's what we were.
Kid
we
props.
were.
We were props and stand-ins.
Yep. I was on a float once. St. Cloud used to have Pioneer Days
Yeah.
way back. And my younger brother and I were on a float once because they needed 2 kids on a float for some float. I don't know, didn't remember what float it was, but we were on the float.
Well, why not? I would have done the same thing.
Sure.
Yeah,
Like,
so,
I'm going to give you some food tonight. Get on the float.
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
It was usually the other way around. If you don't get on the float, you're not getting any food tonight.
Right. Yeah.
That was you.
that was me, that's
here's
right.
some food, get on the float.
How
Yeah.
many kids were in the family?
There's 4 of us,
Yep.
4 children.
Okay, not a huge family, but still with all of the commitments of the chamber and the Lions.
Yep.
And raising 4 kids, I don't think he had a whole lot of time to hang out.
Well, no, he was very busy, and my older brother is 4 years older than I am, and then Peg is 6 years younger,
Right.
and Rick is 9 years younger. So I wouldn't suggest we grew up as 2 families, but it was my
We
older
did,
brother and
sort
I.
of, yeah.
It was a little different situation than when Peg and Rick grew up.
Yeah.
Right, so they were in school. The 2 of them were in school before the younger 2 of us were even born.
Uh-huh.
So it was kind of like 2 families.
Yep.
My mother had someone at Tech, Central, and Wilson, she had everything. I mean, we were all spread across all the schools.
Mm-hmm.
So my parents had an invested interest in the school systems as well.
Right, that's what I was thinking. They sort of had a stake in a lot of different games.
Absolutely.
Well, they did.
And they had knowledge of what was working in lots or not working in lots of different environments.
Yes.
Right.
Well, and Dad and Mom were very involved in the church too. At that time,
Yes.
it was the First Methodist Church, and I don't know if they called them elders or whatever, or church
Dad,
board
they
or
did
whatever.
just everything.
Whatever it was,
Yeah.
but Dad was deeply involved in that too.
Yeah.
Okay. How did you look at it now and say, how did he come up with enough hours in the day?
He just found them.
I have no idea because at Dad's funeral, I remember every minute someone at visitation, someone was saying, "Oh, your dad was my mentor."
Yes.
How in the world did the man have time to mentor 100 different people
Right.
across the board? And a lot of them women. He was, Sue Mackert shared that with
Yep.
us too, is that he was an incredible mentor to women in business when that wasn't maybe exactly the thing that men leaders were doing, was encouraging women. And volunteerism was huge for my dad. He believed in it and he nurtured it in us. And I think that's why people saw him as a mentor. He had a gift for seeing someone, talking to them, and then hooking them up with the right place. And some cases, something they'd never even thought of doing.
Yeah, Dad fully understood what networking was long before anybody figured out what networking was using that term. And Dad had one bad habit. He couldn't say no.
No.
And he couldn't say no, and it was all about, whenever anybody came to him for anything, he had a suggestion for a solution to the question,
Right.
or he would get involved in it to take it, take something down the path to whatever they were trying to accomplish. And he always did it from behind the scenes.
Yes.
He was never, ever out
Never
front.
wanted the credit for
No,
anything.
and
Never.
he just knew how to get it started, or who to point them to, or how to shepherd something from its very inception to its completion.
Right.
So whatever it was, so it would grow. I mean, that's just what he did all the time. He would. It was interesting when we moved to St. Cloud in 1953. Dad's office was right next to the Paramount Theater.
Yep.
Right next to the Paramount Theater, and of course, if you were ever downtown, he wasn't in his office as much as you'd look up and down the street, and there he was going up and down the street, seeing people and doing that. And I think the same was true when they moved over to where the old Land O'Lakes teepee was and the Widener Plumbing office was. I mean, he was constantly on the go, and then there was the office on the corner where the
Well,
parking
and that
lot.
was the first, he convinced the city
That's right.
to build the first big parking lot in town and put the chamber office right there in the corner. The deal was that then the chamber had to maintain the public bathrooms.
Yeah, because there was a little bit of a comfort station right on that
Right,
corner.
right.
And yeah, so and I'm not so sure that he didn't negotiate a deal so the chamber probably didn't have to pay any rent.
Oh, I don't.
And in kind to take care of the public restrooms and everything. And every one of us children at one time
Yes.
worked in that building and cleaned
Got
those restrooms.
paid to clean the restrooms. Yep, that was kind of your rite of passage when you got old enough to have that job. You know, it was, which, you know, gave us some responsibility, and it also teaches you that there's nothing you can't do if you have to make money, to get by. I mean, that nothing is what do I want to say? You can do anything. Nothing is below you. If you need to make it, you do it.
Well, I think that resonates with one of the things that I heard Dad say, not very often, but he said, always remember, there's no small people, just a few small jobs.
Right.
And he was just incredibly genuine. Never, ever, ever heard him say a negative thing or a cross word about anybody.
No.
He treasured the relationships that he built, and he loved it. He just absolutely
He
loved
loved
it.
people.
Yep.
He was the absolute image of an extrovert, first of all, and a people person. And he was, I guess an innovator doesn't even cover what Dad did. When we came in '53, he was really excited that St. Cloud had no debt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so he went out, and right away there was no business base except for Franklin Manufacturing. That was it. There was nothing in St. Cloud. And because of where St. Cloud is situated with all the highways, and that was even before '94, but there was 52 and 152 and 10 and 23 and 15. And he saw that as an opportunity to make this an industrial hub. And when he started going out, he found out that a city not having any debt wasn't necessarily a good thing. And we didn't have a public waterworks or sewer system at that time. And so in the first year he was here, and they had defeated the bond referendum before he came here to build that. And before the year was out, he gathered business leaders together, and they overwhelmingly passed. I think it was a $3 million bond referendum to build a water plant. And St. Cloud's water plant was way ahead of its time. It put back water into the Mississippi that was cleaner than what it took out. And that was in 1953. That was unheard of. So he hit the ground running. He wasn't even here a year, and he rallied people together to pass a bond referendum that had been miserably defeated before he got here.
He would take people that were at various ends of issues or
Yes.
different factions, if you will, and he would get them all in a room together. And by whatever time they spent together, by time it got done, they all came to a conclusion. And it ended up being, did you get what you wanted, or did you get what you needed? And he had the ability to do that and keep a very calm, a very calm atmosphere and demeanor in it. He was one of the things that I'll never forget and I realized that as I was in my own business career, is he was a strategic thinker long before I think
Yes.
most people even could put the words strategic thinking together.
Strategic planning wasn't a thing.
Yeah, and what it was. He realized, and Peg pointed out a good example with the water plant thing, but he realized what St. Cloud needed in the future to grow. And then he would quietly put those pieces together and have everything organized and put together before there was even a breath of it in the public for conversation or discourse. So he really had built the relationships and the bonds between the people in the community. So if it was some important initiative, public or through the chamber, all of the vetting had been done.
Yes.
All of the discussions about
Planning, the long-term planning.
Yeah, it was
before it
all
ever
developed.
started.
His strategic thinking was way ahead of its time.
Yep.
Way ahead of its time. He just had that unique ability to do it. He was so genuine. I mean, incredibly genuine with everybody that he dealt with.
Oh, yeah, what you see was what you got.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Dad was that's who Dad was. He was kind and thoughtful and yet to the point. And he always, I think he made people always think that things were their idea.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
It wasn't, because he never did. That was the thing. He always told us that you don't take the credit. You should not be us, children, family. The public spotlight is not what you should do. You should be behind the scenes, laying the groundwork, doing the work, and then recruiting people. And then the other thing he said is, and if it goes south, which I don't think for him it hardly ever did.
Well, it wasn't an option.
But if it did, you take the responsibility.
Yeah.
Then you get out front and you take the responsibility.
See, he saw and examples that stand out in my mind. And if you think about, if you go back to the 60s and how St. Cloud has evolved, in the 50s and the early 60s, the industry in St. Cloud was retailing, and it was very vibrant. Yep. Dad realized that there had to be another step beyond retail, not to diminish retail, but another step to build the economy. And an unfortunate circumstance turned into really the foundation of the first industrial park. Right. He formed St. Cloud Opportunities with a number of other, with L.K. McClellan and Jerry Keegan was involved and a number of people. And then the Finger Hut plant in Princeton burned down. Dad and a number of them were in a car the next day down in Minnetonka in Manny. The
ashes were still smoking.
In Manny Finger Hut's office to propose that instead of rebuilding in Princeton, that he rebuild his organization in St. Cloud. And with St. Cloud Opportunities, they had already, I think this is correct, they had already formed the organization to the extent that they owned the land.
Yes, so they had already purchased some farmland, which is out across from the vets, which was out in the country in those days, not anymore. And they had purchased that. And they had gotten, before they purchased the land, they got this nonprofit together, got all the paperwork filed, and then Finger Hut burned down, and those guys the next morning were there, and it was successful. And that was the first industrial park. And then they bought a piece of a joint adjacent to that, and then they bought the third one out on...
out on, right off on 94.
Right off of 94.
I mean, they filled one up, and then they built the next one, and that's where Nahan Printing is located today. And American Linen and whoever else is out there. But they were ready for the next one before the most recent one had filled up. So they were always looking forward. But as St. Cloud Opportunities grew from that group that Dad put together, they recruited more and more people to be involved in St. Cloud Opportunities. Even after Dad retired from the chamber.
From the chamber. He never retired.
What, in the late 80s or mid to late
86.
86.
Yep.
After he retired from that, he ran St. Cloud Opportunities.
Right.
And actually it was, and I think they officed with Mark Knobloch somewhere, but it was Dad, and it was Don Volkmuth was involved in it,
Yes.
and so was Don Hinkelmeyer.
Yep.
And they just said, I think Dad just said, okay, I'm retired from the chamber, I'm going to stay involved, so why don't I is it
just do
okay if I
this.
run St. Cloud Opportunities? And he did, so it grew and grew and grew, and ultimately, of course, the most recent one out on I-94 just continues to grow.
He was in the group that got New Flyer here.
Yes.
I don't know that that was inked till after he died, but he was in the group. And the other thing he had in the works was to get Arctic Cat here.
Yes.
Because we're from Thief River originally, and so it was really important to him. And he got Arctic Cat here, and then there is a street named after him out in that industrial park. And after he died, then Tom Moore convinced Arctic Cat to rotate their building by 90 degrees so their address would be Glen Carlson Drive. Because Thief River was very important to my dad as well, extremely important. But I can't tell you how many things he founded. It was just, he and 7 other people founded Princess K of the Milky Way. He founded Central Minnesota Dairy Days. He founded the St. Cloud Opportunities. He helped found the St. Cloud Area Economic Development Partnership. He founded the Amateur Baseball, Minnesota Amateur Baseball Hall of Fame,
which
and
is
then
now
the
located
museum.
in the convention center.
Yeah, and he worked tirelessly for the March of Dimes. That
no
was
question.
extremely important to him. And my first memory of volunteerism, I was 5 years old, and March of Dimes always did their march in March. And I was standing and March in Minnesota in the 1950s was not nice. Wasn't nice. And I'm standing on the corner of Kresge's,
Sure.
across from Woolworths, which is what, 7th?
7th and
Yeah,
that's Ross's on the
7th and
corner.
St. Germain. And I'm standing on that corner with a canister, and I am 5. And I'm standing there with a March of Dimes canister. And the thing about that is, and there was no Gore-Tex and it was cold. But I don't ever remember saying, well, why the heck am I doing this? And I later was teen chair for March of Dimes for Stearns County. And that wasn't, not only were we involved in cleaning the bathrooms, but we were also taught that giving back is what you do. And that's what Dad's life was
absolutely.
about. Dad worked for nonprofits. He started with the chamber when I was born in 1950, and then spent the rest of his life working for nonprofits and giving back. And that is something he really nurtured in all of us.
Well, he did.
I'm sorry. Could you, in the narrative here, we need to get as much as we can about the chamber itself and his path through the chamber is a mechanism of what he tried to achieve. So what I was going to ask is what was his path to becoming executive director?
Well, it was, as Peg mentioned, we grew up in Thief River Falls, and we lived there until '53. I think it was in early 1953. Some of the leaders of the St. Cloud Chamber of Commerce recruited Dad, and I think they found out about who he was and what he had done.
Barney Williams.
Yeah, because he was very active in the state JCs. He might have been JC of the year somewhere.
Yeah, he was.
And so on and so forth. So they were looking for a new chamber manager, I think was his title anyway.
Right.
So they recruited Dad, and he took the job, I think, very quickly in the interview process.
Yes.
I don't think it lasted very long, because when we lived in Thief River, Dad was the manager. They called it the Civic and Commerce end, but he was the manager of the Thief River Falls Civic and Commerce. He was also the district manager for the Minneapolis Star and Tribune. So he had 2 jobs. We suspect, and Peg and I were talking about, we suspect that the opportunity to come to St. Cloud was one job, probably make the same or a little more, and maybe have a little more time to himself, albeit he still was deeply involved.
Didn't work.
But we came in '53, and it blossomed from. We moved in the summer.
Yeah, we moved in June.
53.
He moved in March.
Yeah.
He came down in March.
And-
but when he started with the chamber, there were right around 300 members. And when he retired, or not even before he retired. In 30 years, there were over 1,000 members.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Well,
So-
yeah, it almost came down to a point, and I remember this in my young business career in St. Cloud, being involved in the membership drives. If you went to somebody who wasn't a member of the chamber, it wasn't a very challenging job to convince them that they should join the chamber. They understood the value of it because they saw what had happened in St. Cloud and how it blossomed, and of course that just led to the continued growth, and it was a labor of love for Dad. I don't think he ever looked at it as working.
Oh no, he said it was fun. And he told people that this is the most fun you could ever have. And the thing that changed when Dad took over in St. Cloud at the chamber is it wasn't just about business anymore. He started BE Day, Business Education Day. So he tied the colleges, the 3 colleges and the chamber together. And then he started working with the colleges and with it was the vocational school at that point in time, to have them create programs that would educate people for jobs in St. Cloud. That was another one of his innovations. And he was instrumental in getting Crossroads built. And that was huge because you had the downtown and they were leery of a shopping center. And he managed to, and they had to annex some of Wade Park so that Crossroads would all be in St. Cloud. And they convinced Wade Park to do that.
That was a battle, too.
And that was a huge battle. And he was instrumental in getting the chamber involved in getting the first civic center built. And as we said, the water treatment industry, he changed the chamber from just this small group of business people, and as Rollie said, mostly retail, insurance, and things like that, to being this incredibly broad-based, bringing in teachers, bringing in the medical, that's the other thing, tying the medical community to the chamber, to making the chamber something way more than it was. Because, well, at one point, Dad, and in his obituaries, they called him Mr. St. Cloud. And that was because St. Cloud was what he cared about. So he made the chamber into the hub of St. Cloud, the center of St. Cloud, where there wasn't anything that went on in St. Cloud that he didn't bring in the chamber and bring the chamber to it and spread it out, that was the huge change. And then starting Top Hatters to really encourage new business. So it was his love of St. Cloud, and he just wanted it to be the best it could be. And nothing excited him more than in, I believe it was 73, when it became an All-American city.
Oh gosh, I remember it vividly.
He worked so hard for that.
What's the criteria? What did it take?
You have to have this broad base and this broad, and I don't remember, but it wasn't an easy thing, and it took like 5 years.
Well, it did, and their first entry into the All-America City competition, St. Cloud wasn't selected as one.
No.
So I suspect Dad said, all right, we might not have portrayed this, and this segment of the community as well, so let's get it right the next time. It was huge. It was huge when St. Cloud was recognized as an All-America city, because he
and somebody wrote a song, which I have on a tape somewhere, about St. Cloud being an All-American city.
See, as Peg pointed out, if really the St. Cloud Area Chamber of Commerce,
and that was the thing, is adding area. That was extremely important to my dad.
It was the hub of the wheel.
Yep.
And then the spokes were all the organizations, and as Peg pointed out too, whether it was retail, whether it was industrial, whether it was medical, whether it was education, whether it was farming, rural and farming,
very tight
and
to
everything.
farming,
He
right.
understood that ultimately with various activities and segments, you had to bring some of them together to work together to do what they did. It was like a second nature to him, and he just did it. He was respected by absolutely everybody.
Right, the farmers at Dairy Day too. And the other thing is if there was a legislative issue, whether it was a city council, a business interest needed something, my dad was at the city council meeting, talking to the mayor,
Yep.
talking to the council, or down in St. Paul, working with the legislature to get what was best for St. Cloud, always what was best
Sure.
for St. Cloud and for its growth. And in fact, he had the greatest prayer network in the world, because he also then brought in St. John's and St. Ben's
Yeah.
and the monastery out in St. Joe, the nuns. He brought Sister Coleman
Oh, sure.
into the chamber, into that leadership, so that there wasn't any segment of the St. Cloud area that wasn't represented and didn't have a voice. And that was important to Dad, that everybody had a voice. And that's what took St. Cloud from this cozy little town of, less than 30,000 people when
Yeah, I
we
think that's
moved
what it
here,
was.
to the St. Cloud metro area, which it is now.
He played a role of some sort when the Crossroads opened, of course, and there was a lot of competition retail-wise. But he played a role to some degree. I don't remember exactly what, but got the city together to say, all right, we have to do something with downtown.
Right.
We have to we have to have something more than or better than what we have now. Thus, the Mall Germain. Now, as it turned out, the Mall Germain and the Ring Road, everything evolves
Well, it
in the
outgrew
ages.
out that, yeah.
But I remember vividly the night that they had a formal banquet at the Germain Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
For all of the businesses and city leaders and everything, for like the official opening of the Mall Germain. And Dad called on a notable politician to come and say some words, and Hubert Humphrey came.
All right.
And was
Dad-
at our house
Yes.
before he was there. So, I mean, I was this kid sitting there with talking, and as children, we were never relegated to another room.
No.
I mean, he had a few people over before the event, and Hubert Humphrey's sitting in our living room, and we're sitting there too, because we're part of that. But that's that nurturing side. Dad, he knew that there had to be the next generation of leaders. And so he kept moving people into those roles so that there was always another group coming up.
It was like a feeder system.
Yep.
There was always a strong bench, as time evolved, and he helped bring people along with the right amount of exposure, rather than throw them in the deep end of the pool right away. He would help them develop and understand the leadership, the leadership that was necessary. He identified. It's interesting how he would identify leaders to get them involved. And I remember a couple of individuals who were perceived in St. Cloud to not have many leadership skills and were not really forward thinkers or anything. And they were prominent business people. And I think Dad took that as a challenge.
Oh, absolutely.
So he recruited the individuals to get involved in the chamber and bring it along to the point that each one of the two that I remember vividly ultimately were presidents of the chamber.
Yep.
But Dad did it in such a way that those individuals just loved it.
Right.
They just
Nobody said no to Dad
No.
either. Dad didn't say no, and no one said. And the other point that my father was incredibly proud of is that while my dad was head of the chamber, St. Cloud never defeated a bond referendum, ever. And that was a huge building because all of us baby boomers were coming along. Never defeated a bond referendum. And Dad used to he talked about that a lot.
Yep.
Because that was another spoke to the wheel. And St. Cloud State grew tremendously as well during that time, because education, he also saw that as that's how you produce your leaders, your healthcare people, whatever, for the future, is having a good, solid education in the area. And he was very proud of that St. Cloud was the only, at one point in time, there was only, and I don't know what the other city was in the country that had never, ever defeated a bond referendum.
But he led from behind the curtain.
Yes.
When there was a bond issue coming or a need for something to be a bond issue, He'd get all the right people together behind the scenes, and as I mentioned earlier, long before it got to the point that it might be public debate, and so
he anticipated.
He anticipated. He knew what was coming.
The questions and the concerns that people might raise before they ever raised them, and so he had them answered. So whether it was building crossroads or a bond referendum, so when the first information came out in the Times or on the radio, he already answered everybody's questions and concerns before they ever happened. And the other thing he did that really made a difference in the chamber and became a focus is that my dad always said that you cannot be part of a problem and you better not complain unless you're willing to be part of the solution.
Exactly. Exactly.
So he took some people who were huge critics and he brought them in to solve the problem they were complaining about. They became the main moving force to solving the problem they were complaining about.
You might call him a great arbitrator.
Oh, absolutely.
Really,
he could bring any two sides
and
together.
if you look at, as Peg mentioned, the segments of the community, whether it was services or medical or retail or industrial or the education institutions, if you look at the individuals that were presidents of the chamber during Dad's tenure, you will find a representative from every one of those segments all the time. And the reason I point that out is in some chambers of commerce around the United States and some organizations, they have a kind of a pet segment or component of the community, and a lot of the leadership just comes from that component. Not with Dad. That was well represented all the way across, because it showed that segment, whether it was education. I remember Dr. George Budd, who was president of the St. Cloud State University at one time, or St. Cloud State College, was president of the chamber. But it provided an opportunity for the rest of the community leaders to get to know the head of that segment of the community. And like I say, Dad would just organize it, set it up, and turn them loose.
Well, and then on the freshman check-in day at St. Cloud State, the chamber had a huge table, had a huge presence at freshman orientation, and they handed out, I don't know, pencils and things.
Letter openers.
Whatever.
And glazed donuts.
Yes, and glazed donuts. But to take these young people coming into the college and immediately familiarize them with St. Cloud, and again, the hope being that the best and the brightest of those would stay here. It was all about retention of business, retention of industry, retention of members for the chamber, and adding, of course, building, but then maintaining. Sometimes people are only concerned with building something, but not maintaining it. But my dad was concerned with building it and maintaining it. And like St. Cloud, what was best for St. Cloud? Always what was best.
I think another interesting segment of it too, and this goes back to probably the mid to late 50s. Two guys that Dad got to know through the St. Cloud Rocks, because the Rocks were a big deal. And we had
they were professional baseball. They were a farm club
and
for the Cubs.
And he was the recording secretary. He was the business executive for the St. Cloud Rocks. He was the business manager
of the St. Cloud Rocks.
He showed us canceled checks from people like
Matty Alou,
Orlando Cepeda, when they played here briefly. But the point being was, and I think this came from the appeal that the Rocks had. I remember a couple of guys came to Dad, and it was Dick Putz and Speed Winter. Dick Putz and Speed Winter, of course, Dick's name is on the facility, and they got into a conversation about what can we do to enhance youth sports in St. Cloud, and thus came the Little League. And the field was out by where the airport was, where the...
As soon as Whitney went out, Little League.
Little League was there, and they all got together. It was a tremendous organization. I don't know how many teams they had.
Sports Inc. started.
But Sports Inc. started. They put that group together. And through the years, as we mentioned before, Dad would involve us in some things.
Oh, yeah.
So I remember having to pull weeds around the perimeter of the fence. And I was the PA announcer, and I ran the concession stand. But the point being is, Dad had a dialogue with those guys and said, "What can we do to enhance, youth sports?" And it was baseball, and it was born from that. So you know, it was Dick Putz and Speed Winter and Dad and a lot of other guys. And because
Right.
I remember when I would work in the concession stand, every time I worked in the concession stand, I worked with a different volunteer
Yes.
that was involved in Sports Inc. And
Yep.
so you got to know people that way. And he was deeply involved in the St. Cloud Lions Club at that time. Of course, he was president. But you know,
Well, and
he got them immersed in their big fundraising, which was Sight and Vision, and they sold Christmas trees and thousands of them. But he never the only time I ever saw him out front of something where he was prominent was when he was president of the Lions Club,
yeah.
because you know he had the visibility as president. But he just had this knack to talk to people, understand a need, and then have the vision to see how to begin to formulate it and move
And
it
then
forward.
get the arts council. He worked bringing people in the arts into the chamber. He brought people in who, and women in particular, I think of Arlene Helgeson.
Yes,
who
exactly.
They loved the arts. We got the sculptures when they did the mall.
Yep.
The Germain Mall. And they brought that, and he got a group together that would start the St. Cloud Arts Council and then tied that in to the chamber. I mean, there's virtually nothing that wasn't tied to the chamber, so that it became, like we said, it's the hub, and it's what made, I mean, I read some things from when Dad died too, and that what he put in place, what he started, would reach way far into the future. And a good friend of mine from the time I was a little girl, Sandy Neisling, who eventually was president of the chamber, you know, said that. She said, everything that I look at while I, you know, was president of the chamber that was started and going and moving, the moving parts were all go back, you know, to your dad. And she said, why didn't I sit and talk to him more when we were teenagers? But it's hard to find something that the chamber wasn't involved in in the 33 years.
Yeah, but
and no one else was ever head of a chamber for longer than
I don't
Dad.
think so. But
Your father was head of the chamber for 33 years.
33 years.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Holy cow. But one of the most important, we're a little partial to this, one of the most important things to him was the family.
Absolutely.
It was, you know, and we mentioned, you know, when you were there for breakfast, you were there for dinner, and nobody had to tell you, you knew, because we'd have this great dialogue, but as you look through the years and we look, you know, Peg and I look back and our siblings look back, the Mom and Dad were very, very special grandparents.
They found time for that as well.
Always,
yes.
Constantly found time to get to know the grandchildren and spend time with them. He didn't know many of the great-grandchildren because Dad passed away in '99, but family was. I would suggest to you that family was the center of the foundation, and
But that's what he made the chamber too.
Well, it's true.
He made it a family, and I think that's that hub, that's that core, because family was everything to my father. And as many things as he was involved in, I didn't have an absent dad. My dad was always around.
Oh yeah.
And yet, also we were apart. But again, that was that mentoring piece.
Mm-hmm.
That was, you know, Rollie went more into business. I work a lot with healthcare in St. Cloud. I work with Centricare. But it was that mentoring of our family and of the community. Always. And I think that's the deal. He made the chamber a family.
Yeah. I think that's a very accurate depiction. One of the most proud moments, and it was over a fairly long period of time, when I started my business community in the community, or started in business in the community, and Donna and I and the boys moved from 1979. But the proud moment of it was when I would meet new people. One of the first things they would say is, "Oh, you're Glenn Carlson's son."
Yeah.
And that was an incredible sense of pride. But you know, to us, he was Dad. He was always there, and he came from a large family too. He was the oldest of
13
kids, And I'd have to believe when Dad was growing up, he was a sponge for what was going on around him.
Oh, he was,
And-
absolutely.
And saw what was going on, and I think those things in his mind, because he grew up during the Depression and so on and so forth, he compartmentalized them so he could take them out and say, okay, in my future, we're here in St. Cloud, or wherever he wasn't doing it, it was like, okay, I think I know the solution. He had numerous great job opportunities, offers
I was just going to say that.
from chambers of
much
commerce.
Bigger, much more
Much
money.
bigger,
much more money.
Not only regionally, but around the United States, because he
Yes.
was very active in the national, certainly the Minnesota Chamber, but national. He turned
Yeah.
them all down. This was
wouldn't
his.
leave.
He wouldn't leave. This was the one that he was committed to and dedicated to, and he. There was never anything he got involved in that he didn't see through, and I would never say to the end, because he built him. He helped
It was
develop
meant to
him. Yeah.
keep going.
Be perpetuated.
He also, too, he was co-founder of Crime Stoppers.
Yeah.
So then he also brought the law and order, the peace into it. Because we were the county seat, Stearns County government,
Yeah.
and the city law enforcement. I mean, he just.
From nuns to farmers to artists to cops.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
And everything in between.
And everything in between, and everyone knew who he was, but for him, it wasn't about who he was. He was the chamber, and he was St. Cloud. And that's why he got nicknamed Mr. St. Cloud. And that's what mattered to him. Not that anyone knew him or saw him, but when they saw him, they thought of the chamber and they thought of St. Cloud. And that was his, and his legacy outside of his family, which is tremendous,
Sure.
was St. Cloud.
He had one of his great characteristics was he had an incredible amount of humility.
Oh,
And I remember many times, and the name Myron Hall, I mean the storied St. Cloud Times photographer. I remember us being
Right.
at many gatherings and chamber functions, and they'd line everybody up and the committee members and whatever. And Myron was always hollering at Dad, "Glenn, get in the shot." He would never would get in the photo. He said, "This is theirs."
and when part of the example of that is he was very involved at the March of Dimes, and they always wanted to roast him, and he was like, nope. So they had to make him believe they were planning the roast for someone else.
Yeah.
And it was him. And the same thing with the Minnesota Baseball Hall of Fame. They wanted him from the beginning to be in the Hall of Fame and to get honored. And he said no. So they did the same thing to him because he was in charge of the inductees. They had to trick him and get him in on the side because he would never.
No.
The one thing, though, and one picture we had of Dad right before he died is in the 3rd Industrial Park out on I-94 when they named the street after him. And he was proud of because industry was so important, and the room at the Civic Center.
Oh, absolutely. Glenn Carlson
Those
room,
things, but they weren't important because of what they represented.
If you take our grandchildren, and we've done this with all of mine and Donna's grandchildren, is of course they never knew Dad because when you bring them to St. Cloud, and we always talked about Grandpa Glenn and everything, and we bring them to St. Cloud and say, I'm going to show you who your grandpa was. And on the way in on 94 from the Twin Cities, we stop in the industrial park and show them the street name and everything. We take pictures of them standing on the street sign, and then we take them to the convention center, and then take them up to the whole Hall of Fame area with his portrait up there and the Glenn Carlson room and everything. And I know our grandchildren were just in awe. I mean, it was a jaw dropper for them. They said, "That was your dad?" I said, "Yeah, that was Dad."
Yep, and my grandson Nathan would say, "Why is Grandpa Gwynn's picture bigger than everyone else's?" And we're like, "Well, because," and this is what he did, and also to just show them the kind of effect a person can have if they're not afraid to get involved, and if they're not afraid to volunteer.
Yeah.
And to just completely give themselves to something. My grandson Jack had to do, both in high school and then in college, had to do a piece on their hero. And our Jack was 10 days old when my dad died. But his hero is my dad. And he has done papers and speeches on my dad, on Glenn, because of when he looks around. He grew up in Sartell, and when he looks around and sees, but it's who he was as a person and the community and family that he built, that was the Chamber and St. Cloud. And like you said, everybody, there wasn't a segment, there's nothing that wasn't involved in the Chamber.
I've often thought about this. And when people talk about philanthropists and philanthropy, they always imagine leaders that are incredibly wealthy. My dad, our dad, was a human philanthropist, because his treasure was the people that he had the good fortune to work with, and I don't want to say develop, but to work with and get the best out of them, and have them give back and do things for the community. So he was really a human philanthropist. I mean, that's just what he did.
Well, and he said that. He said, what you give is your time, your talent, and your treasure. That's right. That order. Time and talent came first.
I think you'll find those words, time, talent, and treasure, a few places in the Bible as well.
Yeah. He was a man of great faith. He had to be to take this job and do what he did. And that, you know, he had to have a great faith. And anyone who ever knew Dad, and someone's looking down yelling at us if we don't say something, Mom
absolutely
was, if there ever was a strong, supportive woman behind a man, it was my mother. There's no picture. When they did get pictures, there's no picture of Dad without Mother.
That's right.
And she was so valuable to him in that she could talk things over. And she loved the Chamber too. I mean, we all did.
Yep.
I mean, we just sort of thought that was our life.
Well, it was part of our life. I mean,
it was.
We didn't look at it. We couldn't have imagined it being an organization of various aspects of the community. It was a big part of our life when we were growing up, and we just thought that's the way everything was done, and how people got involved and volunteered.
Yeah, that's how you lived.
Yeah, I mean, you just did that. You be nice to people. You treat people with respect.
Right. And you stand on this corner and freeze to death.
and you be humble, and there's the old saying, if you can't say something nice about people, don't say anything at all.
I think the other thing that I pulled out of one of his, I just had the occasion right before Gail asked us to do this to go through my dad's box of stuff, and Hub Lewandowski wanted me to get some things for the centennial celebration. And the one thing I thought that I pulled out of there was that Glenn created the engine that still drives St. Cloud.
That's very, very well stated.
Yep.
Well stated.
See, I believe that we have our next client here.
Okay.
So what I'd like you to do is just do a little back and forth, if you can, of the people that your dad had a profound influence on within the Chamber. Just like this guy, that guy, her, him.
Sue Mackert.
Sam Wenstrom.
Sam Wenstrom.
Tom Moore.
Tom was like our other brother, by the way. And Don Volkmuth.
Don Volkmuth, yes.
Very close with Don Volkmuth. Barney Williams.
Yes.
Dick Stotts.
Well, L.K. McClelland.
Oh.
Yeah.
Jerry Keegan.
Yeah, they
just go through that wall.
And I was looking at when I got here and went from 1953 until Dad retired. Dad was very close to him. They weren't friends, as in doing things
because that he would have considered a favoritism, and he felt like he had to not have any one special. Although Don Volkmuth, after Dad died, Don considered Dad his best friend.
Yeah.
the Nans.
Oh, Jim Nan, and of course Jim passed away recently. But
Yeah.
but yeah, and well, but no matter where those relationships came from and how he knew those people, there was a bond. There was a bond between them.
Yep.
And you look at them. Another example would have been Mayor Ed Henry.
Oh, yes. And they lived close to us.
Yeah, they lived a couple blocks from us. What did Ed Henry say about Dad in his book?
Well, it was the Micropolis in Transition, I think, was Ed's book, and he said that next to not himself but the mayoral position in St. Cloud, that Glenn Carlson was by far, if not the most important, the second most important person. And then if you remember that for Dad, that didn't mean Dad. That meant the chamber.
Mm-hmm.
So the chamber outside of city government became the most important, relevant, noticeable, talked about thing in St. Cloud.
Well, and I think if you talk about individuals too, another one, Dr. Baranth.
I was just thinking the same thing. That's how the medical he was our doctor, and that's how we got him.
Yeah.
Well, and shortly, within a month after we moved here, I was in an accident, very bad accident, and spent a long time in the St. Cloud Hospital, and then that's how he kind of started putting that medical care, and the nuns at the hospital started bringing Sister Coleman. He loved Sister Coleman, and she him. I mean, the list is it's a long list. Well, and if you talk about the hospital, of course, this is before the inception of Centricare and what it is today. But Gene Bakke, who was the president of St. Cloud Hospital, as a matter of fact, Sam Wenstrom was Dad's assistant at one time, and Gene Bakke hired Sam away from the chamber. Right.
And we always kind of found that kind of humorous, that's how it evolved. But in turn, what happened? If you look on the wall, Sam Wenstrom was president of the chamber at one time too, because he was the in charge of public relations at the hospital. But in those names that we mentioned, I mean, they all played a role in that engine.
Gamble.
Jimmy Gamble. Oh gosh, yes.
I'm just trying to think of top hatter pictures too. There's just, I mean, there were so many people. Grace McDowell.
Oh, Grace McDowell. Oh, yeah. Well, the whole McDowell family. Grace McDowell, and
John.
then and the entire George McDowell.
Yes.
And George was Grace's son.
Yes.
And the whole McDowell roofing and everything. And I think that's now in the third or fourth generation ownership. And Grace was a city council member.
Yeah, and which, now we're talking in the 50s and 60s, when she ran a business.
Yep.
And she and Dad were in fact, Dad set up, I had to do a thing on a hero or someone for me in junior high, and he said, here.
Yeah, Grace
and he
McDowell.
put me with Grace.
Yeah.
And I've just, I'm looking at those, and there's no segment, there's no group that wasn't.
Well, and all of the photos of the past presidents, as I looked on the wall and everything, I remember everyone. I remember what they did, because even all of them in the tenure with the chamber, Dad was always very aware of the fact that he would introduce us. He would introduce us to the chamber leadership, just so we knew. His boss for a year was whoever the president was, just so we knew who it was.
Everybody in town knew who we were because of that.
It was hard to maintain a low profile growing up in St. Cloud.
There was no such thing as maintaining a low profile when we were kids. But again, that was because Dad had a high profile, but he didn't. The chamber and St. Cloud, and then out in the state.
Oh, sure.
And in the country, St. Cloud was very well thought of, and the St. Cloud Chamber, because Dad was the face of that. He didn't mind being the face of that as long as what you saw was the chamber and or St. Cloud.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in meetings around the United States and in the Twin Cities and the suburbs and everything, and invariably, and sometimes there would be a Chamber of Commerce executive would be there, and I would introduce myself, and I wouldn't say, "Did you know my dad?" They would say, are you related to Glenn Carlson?
Are you, Glenn?
And then we'd have this, we'd have this long conversation and delay the start of the meeting or something. But he was, again, he was highly respected and revered. There are many Chamber of Commerce executives that are in roles today or were in important Chamber of Commerce roles that ultimately had called Dad for some advice and counsel about how do I do this and do that. And he just did it unselfishly.
Well, yeah, and nonprofits in general. He mentored so many people. Mark Larkin, who was the head of the Center Care Foundation, considered Dad a mentor because he came to Dad and asked Dad about how about life in a nonprofits. He was considering going into and then staying in the nonprofit sector. And so, and I think any of the people on that wall, Bishop Bartholomew,
Oh, yeah.
he became a very close friend, and the church never had anything to do with business and chamber per se. And then he brought that piece in as well, so that the chamber is an area chamber of commerce, and it is St. Cloud. It is and was the center, and laying the groundwork, and just people and getting to know people. And
He was just one hell of a guy.
yeah, he was.
I like that as the capper. One thing that
About 5 minutes left.
I don't even think I think we're done, except for their birthday wish. So I'd like you to say, hi, I'm Rollie, and I'm Peg, and our father was Glenn Carlson, and then wish the chamber a happy 150th birthday. So let's go through it. Hi, I'm Rollie, and I'm Peg.
Go ahead.
I'm not going to do it. I'm just coaching. We're going to do a little rehearsal. So hi, I'm Rollie, I'm Peg. Our father was Glenn Carlson, and then you wished the happy birthday.
Okay.
Happy 150th birthday.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Rollie Carlson.
And I'm Peggy Carlson, and our dad was Glenn Carlson. And we just want to wish the St. Cloud Area Chamber of Commerce a really happy 150th birthday, anniversary.
And all the best for the future.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait.
Oh,
Slow motion like you're on.
oh, you want me to be the
The
queen?
float? I don't have that.
Yeah, you kind of do it like,
Yeah, well,
you're good. You must have been on a.
yeah, she was.
Cheerleader at Tech.
Yeah,
Yes,
well,
I
that was
was.
it.
You got the wave down. All right. Anything last words that you'd want to say?
Everything on my list was covered.
Okay.
I'm glad that you brought your mom into it. That was
Oh, yeah.
the missing
Special
link.
stuff.
Yeah, that would not be good.
No.
In fact,
No,
the
there
person
would-
that would be the maddest at us for not bringing that in would have been Dad.
Yeah. There would have been a loud clap of thunder later today and a lightning bolt somewhere near
Yeah.
one of us or both of us.
Yep.
Well, that was a wonderful testimonial to your father, in addition to being something for the chamber.
Yeah.
But, just to be able to speak these words on your father's behalf, I mean, it was a great story, and I'll never look at St. Cloud quite the same way again.
Good.
And everybody you talked about, I was here growing up. I moved in 52. We're only a year behind. I'm only probably about the
Yep.
same age. And I know all these people
Oh,
you
yeah.
talk about. This is why I'm standing here, is because of your father. Standing right
That's
here.
great to hear.
Thank you.
In the long run.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Well, I think that if you look at how many people are on that wall and the
Yeah.
walks of life that they come from,
Yeah.
that's what it was, just everybody.
For you guys, I'm going to make a DVD for you.
Oh, it'd be
Oh,
great.
thank you.
And you can have it for posterity, and if you want, we can maybe even touch it up a little bit, no charge. And I think that would be good too, because then what we could do is, it would be something you pass